Welcome to Bare Facts Docs. I'm Marcus Webb, and tonight we're pulling into Alton, Illinois, America's most haunted small town. Most people know RV travel as freedom, the open road, small town charm, parking by a river, waking up to sunrise, exploring local history with your family. It's supposed to be safe, simple, wholesome, but some towns don't want visitors. And Alton, Illinois is one of them. Located on the Mississippi River, just 15 miles north of St. Louis, Alton looks like any other Midwestern river town. Population 26,000. Historic, downtown, antique shops, riverside parks with RV hookups. Tourism brochures call it the most haunted small town in America, and they're not exaggerating. Tonight, I'm sharing 7 of those stories. 7 RV stays that went horribly wrong. 7 warnings that some towns should be driven through, not stayed in. These are the stories the Alton Tourism Board doesn't advertise. Let's begin. RV type, 2019. Thor Chateau 28, Class C motorhome. Travelers, Chen family. 4 people. Horror category. Supernatural pursuit. Location: Gordon Moore Park RV Campground. David and Lisa Chen had been planning their Mississippi River RV trip for 2 years. With their daughter Sema, 12, and Sophie, 9, they'd mapped out a month-long journey from Minneapolis to New Orleans, stopping at river towns along the way. Alton, Illinois was day 8. They pulled into Gordon Moore Park on June 14th, 2023, securing a riverfront spot with full hookups for 3 nights. The park was beautiful manicured grass, mature trees providing shade, and direct access to the Mississippi River just 50 yards from their site. David, an avid fisherman, had researched the area extensively. Alton was known for excellent catfish and bass fishing. "This is perfect," Lisa said, watching the girls explore the playground while David set up their leveling jacks and connected utilities. The late afternoon sun cast golden light across the water. Kayakers paddled past. Other RV families grilled dinner at their sites. Normal. Safe. What? Exactly what they'd hoped for. That night, after s'mores and stories around their portable campfire, the family settled into their RV. David and Lisa took the rear bedroom. Emma and Sophie shared the bunk beds over the cab. By 10 p.m., everyone was asleep, lulled by the gentle sound of the river. David woke at 2:17 a.m. to scratching sounds on the RV's exterior. Not wind, not branches. Deliberate scratching, like fingernails on aluminum, moving from the rear toward the cab. He lay still, listening. The scratching circled the RV passenger side, front, driver's side, back to the rear. A complete loop. Then silence. David slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Lisa, and moved to the window. He pulled back the curtains slowly. The campground was dark. The other RVs were silent, their windows black. But standing between his RV and the river, maybe 30 feet away, was a figure. It was a boy, perhaps 10 years old, wearing what looked like tattered clothing from another era. He stood perfectly still, facing the RV. Even in the darkness, David could see the boy's eyes. They reflected the faint light from the campground's distant security lamp, glowing like an animal's eyes caught in headlight. David's rational mind tried to explain it. A kid from another RV, sleepwalking. Maybe lost. He should check, make sure the child was okay. But something about the figure froze him. The way it stood, motionless. The way it stared, unblinking. The way the shadows seemed to cling to it, making its outline indistinct. David let the curtain fall and backed away from the window. When he looked again 5 seconds later, the figure was gone. The next morning, David convinced himself he'd been half asleep, seeing shadows. He didn't mention it to Lisa. No point worrying her over nothing. After breakfast, David and the girls walked down to the river with fishing gear. Lisa stayed behind to work on her laptop. She was a freelance editor and had deadlines even on vacation. She sat up at the dinette table, her back to the rear window. David found a good spot on the riverbank, baited hooks and cast lines. Within 20 minutes, Emma caught a small bass. Sophie cheered. David felt the tension from the previous night dissolve. This was what the trip was: of family, nature, simple pleasures. But as the morning progressed, David noticed something odd. Every time he glanced upriver, he saw the same boy from last night. The child stood on the opposite bank, maybe 200 yards away, partially obscured by trees. Just standing there, watching. "Dad, who's that kid?" Emma asked, following her father's gaze. "I don't know, honey. Maybe he's fishing too. He doesn't have a rod." David squinted. Emma was right. The boy held nothing. He just stood there, staring across the water at them. "Maybe he's bored," David said, forcing casualness into his voice. "Come on, let's move downstream a bit. Try a different spot." They packed up and relocated 100 yards south. David didn't look back immediately. When he finally did, 15 minutes later, the boy had moved. He was directly across from them again. Same position, same eerie stillness. "Dad," Sophie whispered. "That's creepy." "It's fine," David said, but his hands were shaking as he reeled in his line. "Let's head back to the RV. Your mom probably has lunch ready." As they walked back, David glanced over his shoulder multiple times. The boy followed, staying across the river, maintaining distance, but never falling behind. When they reached their RV, David looked one last time. The boy stood at the water's edge on the opposite shore, now only 100 yards away. Close enough that David could see details. The boy's clothes were ragged, torn. His skin was pale, almost gray, and his eyes, those reflecting eyes, were fixed on David with an intensity that made his stomach turn. David ushered the girls inside quickly. Lisa hadn't noticed anything unusual while they were gone. She'd been deep in editing work, headphones on, blocking out distractions. But when David, Emma, and Sophie returned, she saw the fear in her husband's face. "What happened?" she asked, pulling off her headphones. "Nothing," David lied. "Just got hot out there." The girls wanted to come back, but Emma spoke up. "There was a weird kid watching us from across the river. He followed us." Lisa looked at David for confirmation. He nodded reluctantly. "Probably just curious. Kids are curious." "Did you talk to him?" "He was across the river. Too far." Lisa let it drop, but something in David's tone unsettled her. That evening, while David grilled burgers on their portable propane grill outside, Lisa stayed inside with the girls, helping them with a puzzle at the dinner table. The rear bedroom door, which they always left open, swung shut on its own. Not violently, just a slow, deliberate swing until it clicked closed. "Wind," Lisa said automatically, though the RV's windows were closed and the air conditioning was on. 5 seconds later, the door opened again. Same slow, deliberate movement, as if someone was testing it. "Girls, stay here," Lisa said quietly. She stood and walked to the rear bedroom, her heart beginning to race. She pushed the door fully open and looked inside. The room was empty. The bed was made. David's fishing hat sat on the dresser. Everything normal, except the rear window's privacy shade was up. Lisa always kept it down for privacy, especially at campgrounds. She approached the window slowly. Through the glass, standing in the shadows between their RV and the next site over, was the boy. He was closer now, maybe 15 feet away, close enough that Lisa could see his face clearly. He was young, no more than 10, with hollow cheeks and sunken eyes. His clothes were filthy, covered in mud and something darker that might have been dried blood. And he was soaking wet, water dripping from his hair, his clothes pooling on the ground beneath him. The boy raised one hand and placed it flat against the exterior of the RV, directly level with the window. His palm pressed against the aluminum siding, his fingers spread wide. Lisa couldn't move, couldn't scream. She just stared as the boy's mouth opened slowly, impossibly wide, revealing blackened teeth and a throat that seemed to go on forever. Then he spoke, his voice muffled through the wall, but clear enough to understand. "Come to the river." Lisa ran. She burst out of the bedroom, grabbed the girls, and rushed outside to David. "We're leaving. Now. Pack everything. We're leaving right now." David saw the terror in her eyes and didn't argue. Within 30 minutes, they disconnected utilities, stowed gear, and pulled out of Gordon Moore Park. As they drove away, David glanced in the rearview mirror. The boy stood in the middle of their now empty campsite, watching them go. And behind him, emerging from the tree line between the park and the river, were more figures. Dozens of them. Children, all wet, all staring at the departing RV with hollow eyes. The Chin family drove straight through to Cape Girardeau, Missouri, 90 miles south, before stopping for the night at a well-lit Walmart parking lot. They didn't speak about what had happened. Not that night. The next morning, Lisa researched Alton's history on her phone. What she found made her blood run cold. In 1912, the Mississippi River flooded catastrophically. The water rose 35 feet above normal levels, submerging entire neighborhoods of Alton. 18 people drowned, 12 of them children caught in the current while playing too close to the rising water. The flooding recurred in 1927, 1943, and 1993. Each time, children were among the victims. The total death toll: 47 children over 81 years, all drowned within a 5-mile stretch of the river near Gordon Moore Park. Lisa showed David the article. He stared at the screen for a long time before speaking. "The boy I saw, his clothes, they looked old-fashioned, like from the early 1900s. And he was wet," Lisa added. "Soaking wet, like he'd just come out of the river." They looked at their daughters, who were eating breakfast quietly in the booth, unaware of the conversation. Emma glanced up. "Are we going back to Alton?" "No," David said firmly. "We're not." "Good," Emma said. That place felt wrong. 3 days later, while camping in Arkansas, Sophie woke up screaming. Lisa and David rushed to her bunk. The girl was sitting up, tears streaming down her face, pointing at the window above the dinette. "He's outside. The boy, he's outside." David looked. The window showed only the dark Arkansas campground, other RVs in the distance, trees silhouetted against the night sky. "No boy." "It was just a nightmare," Lisa said, holding Sophie. "He's not here. We're far away." But Sophie shook her head. "He said he's following us. He said we were supposed to come to the river. And since we didn't, he's coming to find us." David checked every window, every door, every lock. Nothing. The campground was peaceful. But the next morning, when David went outside to start their routine inspection, he found something that made him call for Lisa. On the passenger side of the RV, in the dirt beside their site, was a single handprint. Small, child-sized, and still damp, as if the hand that made it was wet. They broke camp and drove home to Minneapolis 3 weeks early, abandoning the rest of their trip. To this day, Sophie refuses to go near the Mississippi River. Emma had nightmares for months, and David swears that sometimes, late at night, he hears the sound of fingernails scratching against the exterior of their RV when it's parked in their driveway, 500 miles from Alton. The Chen family never took another RV trip. The Thor Chateau sits unused in their garage for sale, but with no buyers, because anyone who inspects it closely notices something odd. Dozens of small handprints on the exterior, concentrated near the windows and door, as if children had pressed their palms against the aluminum. The handprints are permanent. No amount of cleaning removes them, and they're always damp. RV type, 2021. Winnebago View 24. Class C. Travelers, Martin and Patricia Hayes. Retired couple. Horror category, historical horror, Confederate ghosts. Location, downtown Alton Street parking, near Confederate Cemetery. Martin Hayes had taught American history for 35 years before retiring in 2022. His wife, Patricia, a former librarian, shared his passion for historical research. Their retirement plan was simple: travel America in their RV, visiting historical sites, documenting their experiences on a blog called Living History Adventures. Alton, Illinois was a natural stop. The town's Civil War history was significant. It had served as a prison camp for Confederate soldiers, a stop on the Underground Railroad, and a strategic supply depot for Union forces. Martin had read extensively about Alton before their arrival on October 12, 2023. They parked their Winnebago on a residential street near downtown, just 3 blocks from the Confederate Cemetery. Illinois law permitted RV parking on public streets for up to 48 hours if the vehicle didn't obstruct traffic. Martin double-checked the regulations. They were legal. That afternoon, they took a self-guided walking tour. They visited the cemetery first, a somber place on a bluff overlooking the river, where 1354 Confederate prisoners were buried in mass graves. A stone monument listed the names of those who died from smallpox during the brutal winter of 1862 to 1863. Patricia photographed the monument while Martin read the inscription aloud. They died far from home, in a land they considered enemy territory. May their souls rest in the peace they were denied in life. Tragic, Patricia said softly. Can you imagine? Dying as a prisoner, thousands of miles from your family, buried in an unmarked mass grave. Martin nodded. The camp conditions were horrendous. Smallpox spread rapidly in the overcrowded barracks. The Union command knew it was essentially a death sentence, but prisoner exchanges had broken down. These men were abandoned. As they walked back toward their RV, Martin noticed something odd. An elderly man stood at the cemetery gate, watching them. He wore a long coat despite the mild weather, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. When Martin waved politely, the man didn't respond. He just stood there, motionless. Probably a caretaker, Patricia suggested. But when they glanced back a moment later, the man was gone. That evening, Martin and Patricia worked on their blog inside the RV, organizing photos and writing about their day. The residential street was quiet, a few houses with lights on, occasional cars passing. At 10 p.m., they locked up and went to bed, planning to explore more of Alton in the morning. At 11:37 p.m., someone knocked on the RV's door. Not a tentative knock. A firm, authoritative rap that echoed through the small interior. Martin sat up, confused. Patricia reached for the bedside lamp. Who would knock at this hour? Martin pulled on his robe and moved to the door. Patricia behind him. He called out, "Who is it?" No response. Just another knock. Rap, dit-dot. Martin turned on the exterior light and looked through the door's small window. A man stood on the sidewalk, the same elderly man from the cemetery. Up close, Martin could see details. The man's coat was tattered and stained. His face was gaunt, his eyes deeply sunken, and something about his appearance seemed off. The colors were muted, as if he was standing in shadow despite the bright exterior light. "Can I help you?" Martin called through the closed door. The man's mouth moved, but no sound came out. He raised one hand and pointed not at the RV, but past it, toward the cemetery 3 blocks away. "I think he's lost," Patricia whispered, maybe confused. "Should we call someone?" Before Martin could answer, the man spoke. His voice was faint, distant, as if coming from far away despite standing just feet from the door. "You desecrated our resting place." Martin and Patricia exchanged a glance. "We didn't desecrate anything," Martin said firmly. "We visited the cemetery respectfully. We're historians. You took photographs. You walked on sacred ground. You spoke our names without permission. The cemetery is a public memorial," Martin argued, his teacher instincts overriding his fear. "We have every right to visit." The man's expression didn't change. "You will return what you took." "We didn't take anything." "You will return tonight, or we will come for you." The man turned and walked away, his coat flapping despite the absence of wind. Martin watched through the window as the figure moved down the street, then simply faded, not walking out of sight, but dissolving into the darkness like smoke. Patricia was already at her laptop, pulling up the photos she'd taken. "Martin, look at this." She'd taken over 50 photos at the cemetery. Martin leaned over her shoulder as she scrolled through them. In the first few shots, the monument, the graves, the stone markers, everything appeared normal. But in the later photos, taken as they were preparing to leave, there were figures. Not clearly visible, but present shapes among the headstones. Shadows that didn't match the angle of the sun. Outlines of people standing in positions where no one had been standing when Patricia pressed the shutter. "This one," Patricia said, her voice shaking. She enlarged a photo showing the cemetery gate. Standing just inside the frame, partially transparent, was the man who just knocked on their door. And behind him were more figures, dozens of them, arranged in rows like soldiers at attention. "We need to delete these," Martin said. "Will that be enough?" Before Martin could answer, the RV's exterior lights flickered. Once, twice, then went out completely, plunging the street into darkness. Through the windshield, Martin saw them. Emerging from the darkness, walking down the center of the residential street were soldiers. Confederate soldiers in tattered gray uniforms, moving in formation. Their faces were hollow, their eyes dark pits. Some limped. Others had visible wounds, dark stains on their uniforms, injuries that should have been fatal. They approached the RV in silence, their boots making no sound on the pavement. Patricia grabbed Martin's arm. "We need to leave. Now." Martin rushed to the driver's seat, fumbling for the keys. The RV's engine turned over once, twice, then caught. He threw it into gear and pulled away from the curb, not bothering with his usual careful maneuvering. In the rear-view mirror, the soldiers stopped in the middle of the street, watching the RV flee. And at the rear of their formation, the elderly man raised one hand in farewell, but in a gesture that looked like a promise. "We will come for you." Martin drove until they reached a truck stop outside of St. Louis, 20 miles away. Only then did they feel safe enough to stop, parked under bright sodium lights with other vehicles around them. Patricia had deleted all the cemetery photos. Every single one. They'd watched as each file disappeared from the memory card. "It's done," she said. "We got rid of them." But Martin wasn't sure. Something about the encounter felt unfinished. The old man's final gesture, that raised hand, had looked like a curse. They tried to sleep but couldn't. Every sound made them jump. Every shadow outside seemed to move with purpose. At 3 a.m., Martin's phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. "You cannot delete us. We are permanent. You will return." Martin showed Patricia. Her face went pale. "That's impossible. I deleted the photos from my camera and laptop. How would they?" Another text arrived. "We are in your device. We are in your memory. We are with you now." Patricia opened her laptop to check. The photos she deleted were back, all 50 of them, restored to the memory card as if they'd never been erased. But they'd changed. The figures in the background were clearer now, closer to the camera, and in every single photo, they were looking directly at the lens, directly at Patricia. The final photo in the sequence only Patricia swore she hadn't taken showed the interior of their RV, taken from the perspective of someone standing inside, looking at the bed where Martin and Patricia had been sleeping when the knock came. "We need to go back," Martin said quietly. "What? No, we can't. We have to. They're not going to stop until we do." They drove back to Alton as dawn broke. The Confederate Cemetery's gates were unlocked, though Martin was certain they'd been chained the previous day. They parked at the entrance and walked in together, carrying Patricia's laptop. At the monument, Martin placed the laptop on the ground, open, displaying the photos. "We're returning them," he said aloud. "We didn't mean disrespect. We were documenting history, honoring your sacrifice. Please, let us go." The laptop screen flickered. The photos disappeared one by one, not deleted, but consumed. The pixels seemed to be pulled into the screen itself, absorbed. When the last photo vanished, the laptop shut down completely, never to restart again. Martin and Patricia stood in silence for a moment. The cemetery felt different now, quieter, but not in a threatening way. Peaceful. They returned to their RV and left Alton immediately, driving straight home to Wisconsin without stopping except for gas. Patricia never photographed another cemetery. Martin removed Alton from their travel blog. And to this day, neither of them can look at photographs of historical sites without searching the backgrounds for figures that shouldn't be there, because they learned that some history doesn't want to be documented. Some dead don't want to be remembered. And some places hold grudges that last far longer than a lifetime. Daniel and Melissa Crawford had been planning this trip for 8 months. 15 years of marriage deserved something special, and Melissa had always been obsessed with America's haunted locations. When she suggested they combine their anniversary with an RV tour of the Midwest's most paranormal sites, Daniel couldn't say no. Alton, Illinois was their third stop, and according to Melissa's research, the crown jewel of their entire journey. McPike Mansion, she read from her tablet as Daniel maneuvered their 32-foot class a motorhome through Alton's narrow streets. Built in 1869, one of the most haunted houses in America. Paul Leichinger, the previous owner, documented over 100 paranormal encounters between 1994 and his death in 2014. And we're parking nearby because, Daniel asked, already knowing the answer. Because the city doesn't allow overnight parking directly at the mansion, Melissa said, her eyes bright with excitement. But there's an RV-friendly lot just 3 blocks away, close enough to walk there at night. Daniel had learned long ago that arguing with Melissa about her paranormal investigations was pointless. She dragged him to the Stanley Hotel, the Myrtles Plantation, and Waverly Hills Sanatorium. Each time, she documented strange sounds, cold spots, and mysterious shadows on her equipment. Each time, Daniel had seen and felt nothing. But he loved her, so he parked where she directed, in a gravel lot behind an abandoned furniture store on Albee Street. The lot was empty except for their RV and a rusted storage container at the far end. The afternoon sun was already setting as they finished setup. Melissa immediately began unloading her equipment. EMF readers, digital voice recorders, full-spectrum cameras, and her prized piece, a ghost box that supposedly allowed spirits to communicate through radio frequency sweeps. The tour isn't until 9, Melissa said, checking her phone. That gives us time for dinner and equipment checks. They ate quickly leftover pasta from the previous night, while Melissa tested her devices. Daniel watched her work with a mixture of affection and resignation. After 15 years, he knew every piece of equipment, every theory, every ghost story she loved to tell. At 8:30 p.m., they locked the RV and walked toward McPike Mansion. The neighborhood changed dramatically within 2 blocks. The commercial area gave way to residential streets lined with Victorian-era homes in various states of repair. Some were beautifully maintained, their painted ladies gleaming under streetlight. Others were obviously abandoned, their windows boarded, their porches sagging. McPike Mansion stood at the end of a long driveway, surrounded by overgrown trees that blocked most of the streetlight. Even from the street, Daniel could feel something wrong about the place. The mansion's 16 rooms rose 3 stories into the darkness, its Italianate architecture creating strange angles and shadows that seemed to move independently of the wind. "It's perfect," Melissa breathed. Their tour group consisted of 8 people plus a guide named Marcus, a local historian who'd been leading ghost tours for 12 years. He took them through the mansion's history, the wealthy families who'd lived there, the alleged murders, the decades of abandonment, and the paranormal activity that had made it famous. Melissa recorded everything, her EMF reader constantly in hand. At 10:45 p.m., the tour ended. Most of the group left immediately, but Marcus allowed Melissa and Daniel to stay an additional 30 minutes for independent investigation. Melissa had paid extra for the privilege. "Just stay on the first floor," Marcus instructed, "and I'll be in the front parlor if you need anything." Melissa immediately headed for the servants' quarters, where Paul Leichinger had documented his most intense experiences. Daniel followed, holding one of her cameras while she swept the room with her EMF reader. Vaseline readings, she murmured, documenting everything in her notebook. Temperature 63 degrees. EMF 2 milligauss. No unusual sounds. Then her EMF reader spiked. The device shrieked as the needle jumped from 0.2 to 8.7 milligauss in seconds. Melissa's hands shook with excitement as she moved the reader around the room, trying to locate the source. "There," she said, pointing to the corner near an old servant's bed. "The field is concentrated right there." Daniel moved the camera toward the corner, seeing nothing but shadows and old furniture. The EMF reading climbed to 12.4 milligauss. "Daniel," Melissa whispered, "do you see that?" He saw it thin, a slight distortion in the corner, like heat shimmer on summer asphalt. The air seemed to ripple and fold around itself, creating a vaguely humanoid shape about 4 feet tall. "Holy shit," Daniel breathed. The shape moved, not walked, but glided, flowing across the room toward them like smoke given form. Melissa's EMF reader screamed as the reading hit 18.6 milligauss, its highest possible measurement. Then the cold hit them. The temperature plummeted so rapidly that their breath became visible fog. Melissa staggered backward, still holding her equipment, her face pale with shock and exhilaration. "I'm getting this," she gasped. "Daniel, tell me you're recording this." "Yeah," he managed, though his hands were shaking so badly the camera footage would probably be useless. The shape stopped directly in front of Melissa. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a sound emerged from the distortion out. A voice exactly, but a whisper that seemed to come from inside their heads rather than the air around them. "Why are you here?" Melissa's professionalism vanished. She'd been investigating the paranormal for 15 years, had visited hundreds of allegedly haunted locations, but she'd never experienced anything like this, something that spoke, that questioned, that interacted. "We're here to document," she said, her voice barely steady. "To learn. To understand." "Understand?" The whisper grew colder, darker. "You play with equipment you don't understand. You seek things you cannot comprehend. You want proof?" The distortion expanded, growing from 4 feet to nearly 7 feet tall. Details began to emerge from the shimmer, the suggestion of clothing, of hands, of a face that was somehow both present and absent. "Marcus," Daniel shouted toward the front of the mansion. "Marcus, we need." "He cannot help you," the whisper said. "You asked for proof. You asked to understand. Then understand this. You are in our home. You are the intruders. You are the ghosts." Every piece of Melissa's equipment activated simultaneously. Her EMF reader shrieked, her voice recorders clicked on, her cameras began shooting rapid-fire photographs. The ghost box, which Melissa had turned off, suddenly roared to life, cycling through radio frequencies so fast it created a continuous scream of white noise and fragmented voices. The distortion moved through Melissa, not around her, through her. She gasped, her entire body going rigid as the temperature around her dropped to freezing. Daniel grabbed her arm, feeling ice-cold skin through her jacket. Her eyes were wide, unseeing, her mouth open in a silent scream. Then it was over. The distortion vanished. The equipment fell silent. Melissa collapsed. Daniel caught her, easing her to the floor as Marcus finally appeared in the doorway, drawn by the noise. "What happened?" Marcus demanded. "I don't know," Daniel said honestly. "Something was here. Something spoke to us." They left immediately. Marcus helped Daniel get Melissa back to the RV, where she finally regained full consciousness. She couldn't stop shaking. "I felt it," she whispered as Daniel wrapped her in blankets. "Inside me. It was cold and old and angry. It showed me things, Daniel. It showed me McPike when it was built. It showed me everyone who died there. It showed me why they stayed." "Why?" Daniel asked, though part of him didn't want to know. "Because they can't leave," Melissa said. "The house won't let them. It's not haunted, Daniel. It's hungry. It collects people, keeps them, feeds on them, and now it knows about us. Daniel wanted to dismiss it as shock, as imagination triggered by the intense experience. But he couldn't, because at that moment, all of Melissa's equipment packed away and their storage compartments activated again. The EMF reader shrieked. The voice recorders clicked on. The cameras began shooting photographs through the closed cabinet doors. And the ghost box, still powered off, began broadcasting through the RV's speakers. "Thank you for visiting. Thank you for the anniversary gift. Thank you for bringing her here." The voice was clearer now, no longer a whisper but a distinct male voice with an antique accent, the voice of someone who'd been dead for over a century. "She is sensitive. She is open. She will return. They always return." Daniel grabbed Melissa and ran from the RV, leaving everything behind: equipment, clothing, their phones, their wallets. They ran through the dark streets until they found a gas station with a payphone. Daniel called 911, though he had no idea what to tell them. The police arrived, checked the RV, found nothing unusual. All of Melissa's equipment was silent, powered off, exactly as it should be. The officers clearly thought they were drunk or high or playing some elaborate prank. But when one officer reviewed the photographs from Melissa's camera the one Daniel had been holding, they found 67 images taken during their investigation. 66 showed the servants' quarters from Daniel's perspective. The 67th showed Daniel and Melissa from behind, standing in the servants' quarters. But in the foreground of the image, between the camera and the couple, was a figure perfectly clear, perfectly detailed, perfectly there. A man in Victorian-era clothing, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes completely black. He was smiling, and behind him, visible through the doorway, were 17 other figures. Men, women, children, all in period clothing, all with the same black eyes, all watching Daniel and Melissa with expressions of patient hunger. The date stamp on the photograph read, October 14th, 2024, 11:03 p.m. The location stamp padded by the camera's G-piece read, McPike Mansion, Alton, Illinois. But according to the police investigation that followed, Daniel and Melissa had left the mansion at 10:50 p.m. The tour guide confirmed it. The security logs confirmed it. The photograph had been taken 13 minutes after they left the building. 13 minutes after they'd already returned to their RV. 13 minutes after they'd already locked themselves inside. Daniel and Melissa abandoned the RV that night. They left Alton on a Greyhound bus at 3:47 a.m., leaving behind $75,000 worth of equipment and a nearly new motorhome they'd purchased specifically for this trip. 3 days later, the Alton Police Department received a call from the furniture store owner. The RV was gone. Security footage showed it driving away on its own at 2:34 a.m., the night after Daniel and Melissa fled. No driver was visible through the windshield. The RV was found 6 weeks later, parked in the driveway of McPike Mansion. All of Melissa's equipment was still inside, still running, still recording. The recordings contained 1847 hours of footage from 6 weeks of continuous operation footage that should have been impossible, as the RV's batteries could only power the equipment for 8 hours maximum. The footage showed the interior of the RV empty and dark until 2:34 a.m. each night, when figures began to appear. 17 figures in Victorian-era clothing, moving through the RV, examining everything, touching Melissa's equipment, and every night at 3:47. And at that time, Daniel and Melissa's Greyhound bus had left Alton. All 17 figures would gather in the RV's main cabin and look directly at the camera. Then they would smile and wave. Jeremy Walsh built his entire online presence around one simple premise. I'll go where other paranormal investigators won't. His YouTube channel, Extreme Haunting, had 2.3 million subscribers who watched him explore abandoned mental hospitals, forgotten cemeteries, and supposedly cursed locations that other investigators deemed too dangerous or too boring. Jeremy's brand was fearlessness mixed with snark. He'd mock the ghosts, challenge the spirits, do everything the paranormal experts warned against, and nothing ever happened to him. 34 investigations across 12 states, and Jeremy had never experienced anything he couldn't explain as wind, rats, or settling buildings. His subscribers loved it because he was honest about the lack of paranormal activity, even when honesty hurt his views. But Alton, Illinois was different. His research had uncovered something genuinely interesting, a network of underground tunnels built in the 1830s, connecting the riverfront businesses to the upper bluff. According to local legends, the tunnels had been used during the Civil War to transport Confederate POWs from riverboats to the prison above. Hundreds of men had died in those tunnels from disease, from violence, from accidents in the dark. And unlike most haunted tunnels Jeremy had investigated, these were genuinely dangerous. The city had sealed most entrances in the 1960s after a series of collapses, but according to Jeremy's sources, at least 3 access points remained. "This is going to be epic," Jeremy said into his camera as he parked his converted Sprinter van on Broadway Street. Just after midnight. Underground tunnels. Actual history. Real danger. Not some bullshit ghost story for tourists. This is the real deal. His van was his mobile headquarters. Custom shelving for equipment. A bed that converted from the seating area. Enough power and water to last 5 days off-grid. Jeremy lived in the van full-time, traveling from location to location, always chasing the next investigation. His contact in Alton, a local historian named David Chenhad, agreed to show Jeremy one of the unsealed tunnel entrances for $500 cash and a promise not to reveal the location publicly. Jeremy had paid without hesitation. They met at 12:30 a.m. in the parking lot of a closed restaurant near the riverfront. David was exactly what Jeremy expected. Mid-50s, enthusiastic about local history, nervous about breaking the law. "The entrance is in a basement," David explained, leading Jeremy down an alley behind Broadway Street. "The building's been abandoned since 2019, but the owner hasn't bothered to properly seal it. You can get inside through a window on the east side." Jeremy filmed everything, narrating for his future video. "So we're literally breaking and entering to access tunnels that the city sealed for public safety. This is either going to be my best video ever or my last video ever." The basement was exactly what Jeremy expected. Concrete floors, water damage, the smell of mold and rat shit. But in the northeast corner, behind a collapsed shelf unit, was a hole in the wall roughly 3 feet square, revealing darkness beyond. "That's it," David said. "The tunnel network starts about 10 feet through that access point. I can't go with you. My knees can't handle crawling. You'll have 3 hours before I need to leave. If you're not back by 3:30 a.m., I'm calling the fire department." "Fair enough," Jeremy said, checking his equipment. He had 2 headlamps, a chest-mounted camera, a handheld flashlight, and his phone with a mapping app that would track his route. "Let's do this." He crawled through the hole. The tunnel beyond was carved from limestone, roughly 6 feet tall and 4 feet wide, just large enough for Jeremy to walk upright if he kept his head slightly bent. The walls were slick with moisture and mineral deposits, and the floor was uneven, covered with debris and standing water. "Okay," Jeremy said to his camera. "This is legitimately creepy. I'll give Alton that much." He walked deeper into the tunnel network, mapping his route on his phone. The main passage branched into smaller side tunnels, some barely large enough to crawl through, others opening into larger chambers that might have been storage areas or resting points for workers. After 20 minutes, Jeremy reached what appeared to be a central Huba large chamber where 5 different tunnels converged. The ceiling here was higher, maybe 8 feet, and someone had carved crude benches from the stone walls. "This is probably where they held the POWs," Jeremy narrated, sweeping his light across the chamber. You can see names and dates carved into the walls. Look at this. 1863. Thomas Garrett, C.A. Confederate States of America. This guy was a prisoner here. He moved closer to examine the carvings. And that's when he noticed something wrong. The dates were wrong. Not the historical dates, those made sense. But mixed in with the 1860s carvings were others. 1994, Mark Stevens, 2003, Alicia Ramirez, 2018, David Park. Recent carvings. Very recent carvings. Jeremy's YouTube persona demanded he make a joke. Oh, wow. Ghosts from 2018. So scary, but the words died in his throat because he just noticed something else. The benches weren't empty. There were people sitting on them. Jeremy's light swept across the chamber, revealing 5 figures seated on the stone benches, perfectly motionless, watching him. They weren't translucent or glowing or any of the bullshit ghost movie special effects. They were solid, real, present. But they were wrong. Their clothing was wrong, a mix of Confederate uniforms. 1990s casual wear, 2000 streetwear, and 2010s outdoor gear. Their faces were wrong, too pale, too still. Their eyes reflecting Jeremy's flashlight like animal eyes caught in headlights. Holy shit, Jeremy breathed. One of the figures stood. He was wearing a Confederate private's uniform, his skin the color of old parchment, his eyes completely colorless, no iris, no pupil. Just blank white that reflected the light. "You came," the figure said, his voice dry and hollow. "They said you would. They said you're one of the loud ones, the ones who demand proof." Jeremy's professional instincts kicked in despite his terror. His camera was still recording. This was proof, actual, undeniable proof of something impossible. Who are you?" Jeremy managed. "I am Thomas Garrett, CSA, the figure said. "I died in this tunnel in 1863. Disease took me. They left my body here for 3 days before removing it." The other figures stood now, moving with unnatural synchronization. "I am Mark Stevens," said a figure in a flannel shirt and jeans. "I died here in 1994. Cave-in trapped me." "I am Alicia Ramirez," said a figure in early 2000s mall fashion. "I died here in 23. Lost in the dark, couldn't find the way out." "I am David Park," said a figure in hiking gear. "I died here in 2018. Same as you will die. Same as they all die. The tunnels call. The tunnels keep." The figures began moving toward Jeremy, gliding across the uneven floor without walking, their movements smooth and inevitable. Jeremy ran in. He bolted back the way he'd come, his headlamp beam bouncing wildly off the tunnel walls. Behind him, he heard movement, not footsteps, but a sliding, scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across stone. His phone's mapping app showed his route clearly. Straight for 200 feet, then left at the branch, then straight for 400 feet to the access hole. Simple, survivable. But when Jeremy reached the branch, it wasn't there. The tunnel continued straight into darkness. No intersections, no branches, just endless limestone passage stretching ahead. No, Jeremy gasped, checking his phone. The map showed him exactly where he should be, where the intersection should be, but the tunnel didn't match the map. He turned around, intending to try a different route. The 5 figures were standing 10 feet away, blocking the passage. They hadn't run. They hadn't even moved quickly. But somehow they were there, between Jeremy and the only direction he'd come from. "The tunnels change," Thomas Garrett said. "They change for us. They change for you. They'll change for whoever comes next." "You wanted proof," Mark Stevens added. "You mocked the spirits. You challenged the darkness. You demanded evidence." The figures moved closer. Jeremy backed away, his spine hitting the tunnel wall. "You have your proof now," Alicia Ramirez said. "Record it. Document it. Share it with your followers. But you won't leave," David Park finished. "None of us leave. The tunnels keep what they call, and they called you the moment you entered. They called you because you're loud, because you're perfect, because when you don't return, more will come looking. The loud ones always bring more. Jeremy's camera, still recording, captured everything. The figures surrounding him. The moment they reached out with hands that felt like frozen stone. The sensation of being lifted off his feet and carried deeper into the tunnels. The last thing the camera recorded was Jeremy's scream as the figures carried him into a section of tunnel that shouldn't exist, a passage that descended at an impossible angle, spiraling down into the earth far below the level of the Mississippi River. Then the camera failed. The audio continued for 17 more minutes, recording Jeremy's screams, his pleas, his final prayer. Then silence. David Chen waited until 3:30 a.m. as agreed. When Jeremy didn't return, David called the fire department, exactly as promised. The search lasted 6 hours. Rescue teams entered the tunnel network through the same access point Jeremy had used. They found the central chamber with the carved names. They found footprints in the mud matching Jeremy's boots. But they didn't find Jeremy. The tunnels ended exactly where the city's 1960s survey said they should end, sealed with concrete, collapsed, impassable. There was no deeper passage, no spiral descent, nothing that matched the footage from Jeremy's camera. The camera was found 3 days later, in Jeremy's van, connected to his laptop. It contained 63 minutes of footage from inside the tunnels, ending with the 17 minutes of screaming audio and black video. The laptop also contained a new video file that Jeremy hadn't created, a file that had appeared on his desktop at 3:47 a.m., while Jeremy was still missing. The file was titled Proof MP4. It was a video message clearly filmed in the central chamber of the tunnels. Jeremy was visible in the frame, sitting on one of the stone benches. Next to him were the 5 figures he'd encountered. They were all smiling. Jeremy spoke to the camera, his voice flat and emotionless. "Hey subscribers, this is my final upload. I found what I was looking for, actual proof of life after death. It's not what I expected. It's not what anyone expects, but it's real." He gestured to the figures beside him. "These are my new friends. They've been teaching me how the tunnels work, how they preserve consciousness, how they keep us awake and aware forever in the dark." Jeremy's smile was wrung too wide, revealing too many teeth. "I'm uploading this video to my channel. I'm scheduling it to post tomorrow at 8 p.m., my usual upload time. I expect it'll get millions of views, and I expect some of you will come looking for me. Some of you will want proof of your own." The 5 figures behind Jeremy leaned forward, their colorless eyes reflecting the camera's light. "Come find us," Jeremy said. "We're waiting. We're always waiting. The tunnels love visitors, and we love having company." The video ended. Jeremy Walsh was never found. His van remained parked on Broadway Street for 6 days before being towed. His YouTube channel automatically posted Proof MP4 at 8 p.m. the next day, exactly as scheduled. The video received 47 million views in the first 12 hours. The comments ranged from shock to skepticism to morbid fascination. But 17 people who watched the video, 17 people scattered across the United States, reported the same experience. They watched the video, and at the exact moment, Jeremy smiled his too wide smile. They heard something, a voice, distant, hollow, coming from their speakers and from inside their heads simultaneously. "Come to Alton. Come to the tunnels. Come prove it's real." 3 of those 17 people did exactly that. They traveled to Alton within days of watching the video. They searched for the tunnel access points. 2 of them found their way inside. Neither of them came back out. Location: Enos Sanitarium area. Target: 2,500 words. The Bennett family didn't set out to become urban explorers. It happened gradually, organically, starting with a photography hobby that Rebecca had picked up during the pandemic. She'd begun documenting abandoned buildings around their home in Austin, Texas, old gas stations, forgotten motels, shuttered shopping malls. Her Instagram following grew. People loved the aesthetic of decay, the melancholy beauty of places left behind. When Rebecca started bringing her husband Michael and their two kids, Sophie, 14, and Lucas, 11, on her photo expeditions, the account exploded. Bennett Family Explorations now had 780,000 followers who tuned in every week to see what abandoned location the family would document next. Their summer 2024 road trip was carefully planned, a 5,000-mile loop through the Midwest and South, documenting abandoned America from the comfort of their 30-foot Forest River RV. Alton, Illinois wasn't originally on their itinerary, but when Rebecca discovered Enos Sanitarium in her research, she knew they had to visit. The sanitarium had been built in 1858 as a treatment facility for feeble-minded and hysterical women, Victorian-era code for any woman who didn't conform to social expectations. It operated for 114 years before closing in 1972, leaving behind a sprawling complex of buildings on the bluff overlooking the Mississippi River. Most of the complex had been demolished in the 1980s, but 3 buildings remained: the main administrative building, a patient dormitory, and the isolation ward where the most difficult patients had been kept. "It's perfect," Rebecca said, showing Michael her research as they set up camp at the Russellville City Park RV campground, just 4 miles from the sanitarium site. The city owns the property but hasn't developed it. There's no active security, and according to Urbex forms, the buildings are still accessible. Michael hesitated. "Is it safe? For the kids?" "We'll be careful," Rebecca promised. "We always are. Besides, this is educational. Sophie's doing a history project on institutional treatment of mental illness, and Lucas needs to work on his photography skill." Sophie, scrolling through her phone at the dinette, rolled her eyes. "Mom, I'm not using an abandoned mental hospital for my history project. Mrs. Henderson would literally think we're insane." "Language," Michael said automatically. "I said insane, not." Sophie. Lucas, more enthusiastic about the adventure, was already packing his camera bag. "Can we go tonight? Night shots are way cooler." "Tomorrow during the day," Rebecca said. "We'll scout it out safely first, then decide if a night shoot is feasible." They visited the sanitarium site the next morning at 11:15 a.m. The location was exactly as Rebecca's research had described: a large tract of overgrown land surrounded by newer residential development, with 3 deteriorating brick buildings visible through the trees. A chain-link fence surrounded the property, but it was old and poorly maintained, with multiple gaps large enough to walk through. "Oi," Rebecca said, distributing equipment. "Michael and I will check the main building first. Sophie, you and Lucas document the exterior architecture, details, anything interesting. Stay together, stay visible, and if anyone approaches, we're lost tourists looking for the scenic overlook." The main administrative building was a 3-story brick structure with Gothic Revival elements, arched windows, decorative stonework, a tower that probably once held a clock. Most of the windows were broken, and vegetation had begun reclaiming the building, with vines covering entire sections of the facade. Inside, the building was a museum of institutional decay. Patient records had been left behind, scattered across floors and stacked in rotting boxes. Old furniture, beds, chairs, restraint equipment filled the rooms in random arrangements. The walls were covered in graffiti, layers of spray paint documenting decades of trespassers. Rebecca documented everything, taking hundreds of photographs while Michael filmed video for their YouTube channel. They were careful, systematic, professional. "This is incredible content," Rebecca murmured, photographing a room filled with patient restraint device leather straps, metal cuffs, cage-like beds designed to immobilize patients completely. "This is going to get huge engagement." They'd been inside for 40 minutes when Sophie's voice came through the walkie-talkie they'd brought for family coordination. "Mom, we found something weird." Rebecca and Michael returned to the exterior, where Sophie and Lucas were standing near the isolation ward, the smallest of the 3 buildings. set apart from the others by about 50 yards of overgrown courtyard. "Look at the windows," Sophie said, pointing. The isolation ward's windows were different from the other buildings. They'd been bricked up from the inside, not boarded, but filled with bricks and mortar, creating solid walls where windows should be. "Why would they brick up windows?" Lucas asked. "To keep patients from seeing out," Michael said quietly. "Or to keep people from seeing in." The isolation ward's door was padlocked, but the lock was rusted and easily broken with a heavy rock. The door opened into complete darkness. The bricked windows meant no natural light penetrated the interior. "This is a bad idea," Michael said. But Rebecca was already inside, her flashlight sweeping across the entrance hallway. "Just a quick look. 10 minutes max to our." The interior was radically different from the main building. No graffiti, no evidence of trespassers. The rooms were small, 6 feet by 8 feet, with heavy doors that locked from the outside. Each door had a small slot at the bottom, presumably for sliding food trays inside. "Solitary confinement cells," Rebecca said, her voice subdued. Even she seemed unsettled by the oppressive atmosphere. Sophie and Lucas stayed close to their parents as they moved deeper into the building. The air was stale and cold despite the August heat outside. Their flashlights revealed scratches on the walls of every cell, thousands of scratch marks, carved by fingernails or improvised tools, covering every surface from floor to ceiling. In the last cell at the end of the hallway, the scratches formed words. Not just words, names. Hundreds of names carved into every available surface, layer upon layer, some carved so deeply they'd penetrated through the plaster to the brick beneath. Margaret Simmons, 1924. Eloise Parker, 1931. Catherine Walsh, 1945. Dorothy Henderson, 1958. The dates ranged from 1897 to 1971, spanning the entire operational period of the sanitarium. They carved their names. Sophie whispered, so someone would remember they existed. Lucas's flashlight swept across the ceiling. "Guys, look up." The ceiling was covered in words too, but these weren't names. It was a single message, carved in letters 6 inches tall, repeated over and over in a spiral pattern that covered the entire surface. "We're still here. We're still here. We're still here. We're still here." "Okay," Michael said firmly. "We're leaving now." But when they turned to leave, the cell door was closed. None of them had heard it close. None of them had seen it move. But it was shut, and when Michael grabbed the handle, it wouldn't open. "It's locked," Michael said, his voice tight with controlled panic. "From the outside." "That's impossible," Rebecca said. "We're the only ones here." Lucas started to cry. Sophie grabbed her brother and pulled him close, her own hands shaking. Michael threw his weight against the door. It didn't budge. The wood was old, but solid, reinforced with metal straps that had held for over 50 years of abandonment. "Use the walkie-talkie," Rebecca said. "Call for help." But the walkie-talkies were dead. All 4 of them. Fully charged batteries, now completely non-functional. Their phones were the same. No signal, no power, screens black. The flashlights began to flicker. "No, no, no," Michael muttered, slapping his flashlight. The beam steadied momentarily, then died completely. Rebecca's flashlight followed seconds later, plunging them into absolute darkness. Sophie and Lucas's flashlights died last, leaving the family in perfect blackness. Then they heard the sound. Scratching, metal on brick, coming from the walls around them. "Who's there?" Michael shouted. "This isn't funny. Let us out." The scratching grew louder, multiplying, coming from all directions: walls, floor, ceiling. It sounded like dozens of people all scratching simultaneously, their fingernails or tools scraping against stone in a chaotic rhythm. Then came the voices. Whispers, dozens of whispers, overlapping and blending. "You came to see us. You came to document us. You came to make us famous. We've been waiting so long. So long in the dark. so long forgotten. The whispers surrounded them, coming from everywhere and nowhere, male and female voices blending together. Rebecca screamed. Lucas was sobbing. Sophie held her brother tight, her eyes squeezed shut even though the darkness was complete. Michael felt along the wall, searching for the door, finding only scratches and carved names that seemed to move under his fingers, rearranging themselves, forming new words. Document us, make us visible, share us with the world. We will. Rebecca shouted into the darkness. We'll share your story. We'll make people remember you. Just let us go. The scratching stopped. The whispers stopped. The silence was somehow worse. Then light not from their flashlights, but a cold blue-white glow that emanated from the walls themselves. The scratch names were glowing, pulsing with bioluminescent light that revealed the entire cell. The names were moving now, actively carving themselves into the walls in real time, hundreds of names appearing and disappearing, layering over each other. Margaret Simmons, Eloise Parker, Catherine Walsh, Dorothy Henderson, and new names, names that didn't belong. Rebecca Bennett, Michael Bennett, Sophie Bennett, Lucas Bennett, Luke. No, Michael breathed. The door opened. Not unlocked, not unlatched, it simply opened, swinging outward on hinges that shouldn't work, revealing the hallway beyond. The hallway was illuminated by the same cold light, every cell door now open, every wall glowing with carved name. Run, Rebecca whispered. Run. They ran. Through the hallway, past cells filled with moving shadows and scraping sounds, through the entrance that seemed impossibly far away, out into the courtyard where afternoon sunlight should have been waiting. But it wasn't afternoon. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and purple. They'd entered the isolation ward at 11:47 a.m. They'd been inside for maybe 15 minutes. But Michael's watch, which had stopped inside the cell now, read 7:23 p.m. 8 hours. 8 hours lost to darkness and whispers and glowing names. The family ran to their RV without speaking, started the engine, and drove away from Alton without stopping. They drove through the night, putting 400 miles between themselves and the sanitarium before finally stopping at a rest area in Iowa. Only then did Rebecca check her camera. She had 847 photographs from their time inside the isolation ward, photographs she didn't remember taking, showing things she didn't remember seeing. The first image showed the family entering the cell with the names on the ceiling. The last image showed the family leaving the cell. The 845 images in between showed the cell from various angles, always the same composition. The glowing walls covered in names. The four Bennetts standing motionless in the center, their eyes closed, their mouths open. And in every photo, there were other figures in the cell with them. Dozens of figures, women in hospital gowns, their faces blurred and indistinct, their hands raised as if reaching for the family. The metadata on the photographs showed they'd been taken at precise 5-second intervals, spanning exactly 7 hours and 54 minutes. 7 hours and 54 minutes, while the family stood motionless in the dark, surrounded by the shadows of women who died forgotten and alone, women who'd finally found someone to share their story. The Bennett family deleted their Instagram account that night. Their YouTube channel went dark without explanation. Their followers flooded comment sections with questions and theories, but no one from the family ever responded. 3 weeks later, Sophie's history teacher, Mrs. Henderson, called the Bennetts home in Austin. Sophie had submitted her history project, a 114-page research paper on institutional treatment of mental illness in Victorian America, focusing specifically on Enos Sanitarium in Alton, Illinois. The paper was extraordinarily detailed, including patient names, treatment descriptions, and outcome records that weren't available in any public database. Sophie's citations referenced documents that didn't exist, photographs that had never been published, patient testimonies that had been destroyed when the sanitarium closed. When Mrs. Henderson asked Sophie about her sources, Sophie didn't remember writing the paper. She didn't remember researching Enos Sanitarium. She didn't remember anything about their trip to Alton at all. But the paper was in her handwriting, written over 847 notebook pages on page, for each photograph on her mother's camera. And every page began with the same sentence: "We are still here." Location: Mineral Springs Hotel area. Diana Marsh had been living full-time in her 24-foot Winnebago for 3 years. After her divorce, after losing the house, after realizing that traditional life had never fit her anyway, she'd sold everything and bought the RV. Best decision she'd ever made. At 53, Diana had finally found peace and solitude. She traveled where she wanted, stayed as long as she liked, answered to no one. Her adult children thought she was having a breakdown. Diana thought she was finally living. Alton, Illinois was supposed to be a 3-day stop, just long enough to visit the antique shops on Broadway Street and explore the historic riverfront. Diana parked her RV in the public lot behind the old Mineral Springs Hotel on East Broadway, a location recommended by her camping app as rustic but safe, great downtown access. The hotel loomed above the parking lot, a massive 5-story brick structure built in 1914. According to the historic marker Diana read while walking past, the hotel had been built over natural mineral springs that early settlers believed had healing properties. The hotel had operated continuously until 1971, when it closed amid allegations of health code violations and mysterious guest disappearances. Now it sat empty, windows dark, a testament to Alton's faded glory. Diana's first night in the parking lot was uneventful. She made dinner, read her book, fell asleep to the sound of traffic on Broadway Street. Normal, safe, comfortable. The second night, she woke at 3:17 a.m. to the sound of running water. At first, Diana thought it was rain, a summer storm rolling in from the river. But when she looked out her window, the sky was clear, stars visible above the hotel's dark silhouette. The sound was coming from outside, from the direction of the hotel. Diana grabbed her flashlight and stepped out of the RV, following the sound. Behind the hotel, barely visible in the darkness, was a small courtyard. And in the center of the courtyard was a fountain, though fountain wasn't quite right. It was more like a natural spring, water bubbling up from a circular stone basin and overflowing onto the ground. Diana approached slowly. The water was crystal clear, catching the moonlight, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow. It looked clean. It looked inviting. Without really thinking about why, Diana knelt beside the basin and dipped her fingers into the water. It was ice cold, shockingly cold, like melted glacier water. But it felt good, clean, and pure, and somehow right. Diana cupped her hands and brought the water to her lips. She drank. The water tasted like minerals and stone, and something else, something ancient and patient and aware. It spread through Diana's body like liquid cold, numbing her tongue, her throat, her chest. Then came the whisper, from inside her head rather than her ears. "Thank you for drinking. Thank you for accepting. Thank you for opening yourself." Diana staggered backward, her hands still dripping with spring water. The courtyard around her seemed to shift and blur, the hotel growing taller, darker, its windows no longer empty but filled with light and movement. "We've been waiting," the whisper continued. "The springs preserve us. The water holds us. And now the water holds you too." Diana ran Dokte back to her RV, slamming the door behind her, locking it with shaking hands. She grabbed her phone to call someone. Police, her daughter, anyone. But her phone screen showed something impossible. 147 missed calls, all from the same number. Her own number. She'd called herself 147 times while she was sleeping. Diana checked her call log. The calls had started at 11:34 p.m. and continued every 3 minutes until 3:17 a.m., the exact moment she'd woken to the sound of running water. Each call had a voicemail. Diana's hand shook as she played the first message. Her own voice, but wrong, hollow, distant, speaking words she didn't remember saying. "Diana, this is you. This is the you from 3 hours from now. Don't drink the water. Whatever you do, don't drink from the spring behind the hotel. If you drink it, you become part of the hotel's collection. You become one of the preserved. I'm calling in to warn you, but I know you won't listen. I didn't listen. None of us listened. I didn't listen. None of us listened." The second message was similar, but more desperate. Third was the same. By the 10th message, Diana's voice had changed, becoming flatter, more emotionless, resigned to whatever fate awaited. The final message, number 147, was only 5 seconds long. "I drank it. You drank it. We are drinking it forever. Welcome to the Springs." Diana threw her phone across the RV. This was insane. Some kind of elaborate prank or nightmare or psychological break. She needed to leave. Now. Immediately. But when Diana tried to start her RV, the engine wouldn't turn over. The battery was dead completely. Impossibly dead, despite being new and fully charged just hours ago. Her flashlight was dead. Her backup batteries were dead. Even the propane for her stove had somehow run out, the tank empty despite being 3/4 full when she parked. Everything was dying around her. Everything except Diana herself. And the water she'd swallowed as cold, spreading through her body, felt more present with each passing minute. She could feel it in her veins, in her cells, changing her from the inside out. Diana sat in the dark RV, listening to the sound of running water that never stopped. The spring behind the hotel, bubbling up from deep underground, flowing eternally from some ancient source that predated the hotel, predated the city, predated human habitation entirely. Water that preserved. Water that kept. Water that held consciousness in its mineral-rich depths for decades, for centuries, for as long as it continued to flow. At 4:47 a.m., Diana opened her RV door and walked back to the courtyard. The spring was still there, still bubbling, still beautiful in the moonlight, and standing around it were figures, dozens of figures, translucent and shimmering, visible through the rising mist. They were guests of the Mineral Springs Hotel, guests from 1914, from 1935, from 1958, from 1971. All the mysterious disappearances, all the guests who checked in and never checked out, all the people who drunk from the spring and been preserved in its cold, eternal flow. "Welcome," they said in unison, their voices like water over stone. "Welcome to the collection. Welcome to preservation. Welcome home." Diana knelt beside the spring and drank again. Deeper this time. Longer. Duts. Letting the water fill her completely, replacing blood with mineral-rich cold, replacing flesh with something that wouldn't decay, wouldn't age, wouldn't die. She felt herself changing, felt her solid body becoming translucent, felt her consciousness spreading out into the water, joining the others, becoming part of the spring's eternal collection. Diana Marsh's RV remained in the parking lot behind the Mineral Springs Hotel for 6 days before being towed. Police found no sign of Diana inside, no clothes, no personal items, no indication of where she'd gone. Her phone was found on the floor, battery completely corroded despite being only 2 months old. When police attempted to review her call history, they found it impossible to access. The data was corrupted. The RV was auctioned 3 months later. The family who bought it reported strange problems. The water system wouldn't drain properly, constantly running even when disconnected from all water sources. They complained about hearing water sounds at night, like a fountain or spring, coming from inside the walls. They sold it after 2 weeks. And in the courtyard behind the Mineral Springs Hotel, the spring continues to flow. Crystal clear, ice cold, inviting, waiting for the next person to drink. Location: downtown Alton, multiple locations. Robert and Grace Kimura had been married for 46 years. They'd raised 3 children, built successful careers, saved diligently for retirement. And when Robert was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer in March 2024, they decided to spend their final months together doing what they'd always dreamed of, traveling America in an RV. "I want to see everything," Robert told Grace as they purchased their Tiffin Allegro. "I want to go everywhere. I want to live 6 months like they're 60 years. Grace, 68 and still healthy, agreed without hesitation. Whatever time they had left, they'd spend it together, moving, exploring, living, until Robert couldn't anymore. Alton, Illinois was their 14th stop on a journey that had taken them from their home in Portland, Oregon, through national parks, historic sites, and small towns across 8 states. Grace had chosen Alton specifically because of its haunted reputation. "If there's anything after death," she told Robert as they parked their RV on State Street, overlooking the Mississippi River, "maybe we'll see some evidence here. Maybe it'll give us hope." Robert, weak from his 3rd round of chemotherapy but still mobile, squeezed her hand. "Maybe." They explored Alton for 3 days, visiting every allegedly haunted location: McPike Mansion, the Confederate Cemetery, the site of the old prison, the underground tunnels. Grace documented everything with her camera while Robert walked slowly beside her, his breathing labored but his spirits high. On their 4th night in Alton, Robert's pain became unbearable. Grace considered driving him to the nearest hospital, but Robert refused. "No hospitals," he whispered. "No more hospitals. I want to be here with you in this strange haunted town. If I'm going to die, I want it to be somewhere interesting." So Grace held him through the night, in their RV parked on a quiet street, while Robert drifted in and out of consciousness, his pain managed only partially by the medications they had left. At 2:34 a.m., Robert opened his eyes and said, "Grace, look outside." Grace looked through the RV window. The street was filled with people, dozens of people standing motionless, all facing their RV line. The figures were translucent, slightly glowing in the darkness, visible, but not quite real. "The ghosts," Robert whispered. "They came to see us." Grace should have been terrified, but instead, she felt something else: curiosity, wonder, and a strange sense of welcome. She opened the RV door and stepped outside. The figures didn't move. They simply watched as Grace approached them, their faces becoming clearer as she drew near. They were people from different eras: war soldiers, Victorian-era women, 1920s families, 1960s teenagers. All dead. All somehow present. One figure stepped forward, a woman in a 1940s dress, her face kind and sad. "We've been waiting for you," the woman said, her voice like wind through leaves. "Not you specifically, but someone like you. Someone who understands that death is not an ending but a continuation. Someone who comes here at the threshold with love still intact." "I don't understand," Grace whispered. "Alton holds death," the woman explained. "The river holds death. The earth holds death. All the violence, all the tragedy, all the lives lost in this place for 200 years, we remain. We persist. And we offer a choice to those who arrive at the moment of transition." Grace looked back at the RV, where Robert lay dying. What choice? To die and scatter, or to die? The woman said, "Your husband is hours away from death. You are decades away. But Alton can preserve you both, keep you together, allow you to continue in a form that exists between life and death. You would remain conscious, remain aware, remain together, forever." "What's the cost?" Grace asked, because there was always a cost. "You stay here," the woman said simply. "You become part of Alton's collection. You become part of what makes this place haunted. You become part of the story that draws others here, searching for proof of life after death. you become evidence. Grace stood in the street, surrounded by the translucent dead, and thought about what the woman was offering. To remain with Robert, to never be separated by death, to continue existing, conscious and aware, for as long as Alton itself existed. The alternative was watching Robert die, then living alone for however many years she had left, then dying herself and hoping they'd somehow reconnect in whatever came next. This was certainty. This was a guarantee. Grace returned to the RV. Robert was awake, watching her through the window. "I heard them," he whispered. "I heard what they offered." "What do you want?" Grace asked. Robert smiled, the same smile he'd given her on their wedding day 46 years ago. "I want to stay with you, however that happens, whatever form it takes. I choose you, Grace, always you." Grace held his hand. "Then we stay." Robert Kimura died at 4:17 a.m. on August 19, 2024, in an RV parked on State Street in Alton, Illinois. Grace Kimura died 7 minutes later, her heart simply stopping as she held her husband's body, willing herself to follow him into whatever came next. Their RV was found at 8:34 a.m. by a morning jogger who noticed the door was open. Police found the Kimaras' bodies together in the bed, holding hands, both appearing peaceful. The coroner's report listed Robert's death as expected cancer-related organ failure. Grace's death was listed as cardiac arrest, cause unknown, though the coroner privately noted it was the strangest case he'd seen in 30 years. A woman with no history of heart disease, whose heart simply stopped beating at the exact moment her body reached her husband's temperature, as if she'd consciously chosen to synchronize her death with his. The Kimura's children came to Alton to collect their parents' belongings. They drove the RV back to Portland and sold it, unable to keep something that held so much grief. But before they left Alton, their daughter Jessica took a final walk through the downtown area her parents had loved. She visited McPike Mansion, the Confederate Cemetery, the riverfront. And at each location, Jessica took photographs, dozens of photographs, trying to see what her parents had seen, trying to understand what had drawn them to this strange, haunted town. When she reviewed the photos later, Jessica found something impossible in every single image. Two figures standing together, holding hands, visible as translucent shapes in the background of each frame. A man and a woman, elderly, Japanese, smiling. Her parents, together, exactly as they'd wanted. And in the final photograph taken at the riverfront, overlook at sunset, two figures were facing the camera, their translucent forms clear and detailed. Robert and Grace Kimura, no longer dying, no longer separated, no longer afraid. Behind them, barely visible, were dozens of other figures, all the ghosts of Alton, all the preserved dead, welcoming the newest members of their eternal collection. The photo's metadata showed it was taken at 6:47 p.m. on August 20, 2024, 26 hours after both Robert and Grace had been declared dead. Location: Milton Schoolhouse area. Target: 1,500 words. Vanessa Park and Chris Donovan weren't typical RV travelers. They were artists: Vanessa, a painter; Chris, a sculptor who'd converted a 1987 Bluebird school bus into a mobile studio. The bus was cramped but functional. Sleeping quarters in the back, art supplies stored in overhead compartments, and just enough space for both of them to work simultaneously. They called it their Creativity on Wheels project, documenting their journey on Instagram, while creating art inspired by America's forgotten places. Alton, Illinois. Caught their attention because of Milton Schoolhouse, an abandoned 3-story school built in 1904, closed in 1983, and left to decay for over 40 years. According to Vanessa's research, the schoolhouse was allegedly haunted by the ghost of a teacher who died in a fire, and students who'd never left. The architecture is perfect, Vanessa said as they parked their bus in an overgrown lot adjacent to the schoolhouse property. Victorian Gothic, all those tall windows, the bell tower. I can get at least 6 paintings from this location. Chris was less interested in the building itself and more interested in the decayed way rust-consumed metal, the patterns of water damage, the organic takeover by vegetation. I want to collect material samples, he said. Pieces of the building to incorporate into sculptures. They set up camp on September 3, 2024, planning a 5-day stay. The lot was technically private property, but clearly abandoned. No fences, no signage, no indication anyone cared what happened here. The first day was productive. Vanessa set up her easel outside the bus and began sketching the schoolhouse from multiple angles. Chris wandered the building's exterior, photographing details and carefully removing small pieces of rotted wood, rusted metal, and crumbling brick. This place has amazing energy, Vanessa said during lunch. Sad, but also expectant. Like it's waiting for something. Chris nodded, distracted by a piece of window frame he'd found. The wood was carved with initials, TREMK, 1979. He photographed it, then carefully wrapped it for later use. That night, they heard the children singing. It started at 11:43 p.m., faint at first, barely audible over the wind. A group of young voices singing a song Vanessa half recognized from her own elementary school years. My country, 'tis of thee. The voices were coming from the schoolhouse. Someone's trespassing, Chris said, grabbing his flashlight. Kids probably, exploring the building. But when they approached the schoolhouse, the singing stopped. The building was dark, silent, completely still. Chris swept his flashlight through the broken windows, revealing nothing but empty classrooms and fallen ceiling tiles. Must have been the wind, Vanessa said, though she didn't believe it. They returned to the bus, locked the doors, and tried to sleep. At 2:17 a.m., the singing started again. Louder this time. Closer. And it wasn't just my country, 'tis of thee anymore. It was a full classroom recitation, dozens of children's voices speaking in unison. The Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America. Vanessa sat up in bed, her heart racing. The voices were directly outside the bus now, surrounding it, speaking in perfect synchronization. And to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Nandomayan. What phrase was that? Then silence. Chris was already at the window, looking out. The lot was empty. No children. No movement. Just darkness and the looming silhouette of Milton Schoolhouse. We're leaving in the morning, Vanessa whispered. But morning didn't come normally. When Vanessa woke, her watch read 6:47 a.m. But outside the bus windows, it was still completely dark. Not pre-dawn darkness, full night. Stars visible. No hint of approaching sunrise. Chris, Vanessa shook her partner awake. Something's wrong. Chris checked his phone. 6:47 a.m., September 4th, 2024. But the sun should have been up an hour ago. Sunrise in Alton at this time of year was 5:38 a.m. They waited, watched through the windows as the darkness continued, unchanged. 7 p.m., 7:30 a.m., 8:00 a.m. The sun never rose. At 8:34 a.m., by their watches and phones, they heard a bell ringing. The schoolhouse bell, in the tower, ringing loud and clear despite the building being abandoned for 40 years. Then the children appeared. They materialized in the lot around the bus, dozens of children aged roughly 6 to 12, all wearing school clothes from different eras. In the 1920s, pinafores and knickers. 1950s, poodle skirts and slacks. 1970s, bell-bottoms and tie-dye shirts. All of the decades of Milton Schoolhouse's operation, all present simultaneously. The children stood motionless, facing the bus, their faces visible in the strange perpetual darkness. Vanessa recognized their expressions. Not angry, not malicious, just sad, profoundly, heartbreakingly sad. One child stepped forward, a girl in a 1960s dress, her hair in pigtails, her face pale and gaunt. "Why did you take pieces of our school?" the girl asked, her voice clear despite the closed bus windows. Chris looked at his collection bag, filled with materials he'd harvested from the building. Wood, dye, metal, bric-a-brac, pieces of the school. "That's all we have left," another child said, a boy in 1940s clothing. "The building is all we have. It holds us. It keeps us. When you take pieces away, we feel it. We feel ourselves breaking apart." Vanessa's throat tightened with guilt and horror. "We didn't know. We're sorry. We'll return everything." But the children shook their heads in unison, a gesture of collective denial. "Too late," they said together, their voices blending into one. "You took pieces. Now you're part of the collection. Now you stay like we stay, forever enrolled at Milton Schoolhouse." The darkness deepened. The bus's interior lights flickered and died, and Vanessa felt something changing inside her, her artistic passion, her creativity, her sense of self beginning to fragment and scatter like the pieces Chris had taken from the building. She looked at Chris and saw the same thing happening to him, his solid form becoming translucent, his features blurring, his presence fading into something that existed between material and memory. "Class is starting," the children announced. "Everyone must attend. Everyone must stay. Enrollment is permanent." The bus doors opened on their own. Vanessa and Chris, no longer fully in control of their bodies, walked outside. The children surrounded them, taking their hands, leading them toward the schoolhouse. "Please," Vanessa whispered. "We have families, people who look for us." "We had families too," the girl in pigtails said sadly. "But the school kept us. Fire, accidents, illness, we died here, and the building wouldn't let us go. Now it has you too. Now you'll learn what we learned. Some places don't release what they claim. Some buildings consume, preserve, and keep forever." Vanessa and Chris were led through the schoolhouse doors. Inside, the building was transformed, no longer abandoned but fully operational. Classrooms filled with desks and chalkboards, hallways lined with lockers, the smell of chalk dust and old books filling the air. They were taken to a classroom on the second floor, room 214. The door closed behind them, and the lesson began. The converted school bus was found on September 11th, 2024, 8 days after Vanessa and Chris had parked it. Police investigation found no sign of the artists. Their art supplies were neatly organized inside the bus. Chris's collection bag was empty. All the materials he'd harvested apparently returned to the schoolhouse property. But on Vanessa's easel, police found a completed painting that she hadn't mentioned in her last Instagram post. The painting showed Milton's schoolhouse at night, every window illuminated, every classroom visible, and in room 214 on the second floor, 2 figures were visible through the window, a woman and a man, sitting at student desks, facing a chalkboard where invisible hands wrote the same lesson over and over. "You are enrolled. You will stay. Class is eternal." The painting was dated September 4th, 2024, 8:34. At the exact moment Vanessa and Chris's social media activity had stopped. And at the bottom of the canvas, in handwriting that wasn't quite Vanessa's, was a note. "We are learning. We will always be learning. If you visit Milton Schoolhouse, bring nothing. Take nothing. The building remembers everything you touch, and it will touch you back." Location: Rocky Fork Creek area. Target: 1,500 words. Tom and Linda Brennan had been planning their retirement RV trip for 15 years. Tom retired from the post office in June 2024. Linda retired from teaching in July. By August, they purchased a 30-foot Jayco Eagle and hit the road, following a carefully planned route through 17 states. Alton, Illinois was stop number 12. chosen because of Linda's lifelong interest in history and Tom's newfound hobby of amateur photography. They booked 3 nights at a small, unofficial RV spot near Rocky Fork Creek, a narrow waterway that wound through the bluffs north of downtown Alton. The spot was primitive. No hookups, no amenities, just a gravel clearing beside the creek with room for 2 or 3 RVs. The property owner charged $15 per night through a Craigslist ad, payment by cash in an envelope left in a mailbox by the road. "It's perfect," Linda said as Tom maneuvered their RV into position. "Quiet, natural, exactly what we wanted." The creek was beautiful, maybe 15 feet wide, flowing clear over limestone bedrock, surrounded by dense forest that blocked most of the late summer heat. Tom immediately set up his camera equipment, planning to shoot long exposure photographs of the water at sunset. Their first evening was idyllic. They cooked dinner on their portable grill, watched the sun set through the trees, listened to the creek flowing past just 20 feet from their RVI. This was what retirement was supposed to be. Peace, nature, time together after decades of work and obligation. At 10:47 p.m., Tom went outside for one final photograph. He'd noticed something interesting about the creek. The way moonlight reflected off the limestone made the water appear to glow slightly, creating an ethereal effect perfect for long exposure photography. He set up his tripod, configured his camera, and started a 60-second exposure. Halfway through the exposure, Tom heard splashing. Not the normal sound of flowing water, but deliberate splashing like someone or something moving through the creek. Tom looked up from his camera. The creek was disturbed, water churning as if something large had just passed through. But Tom saw nothing, no animal, no person, just disturbed water settling back into its normal flow. The exposure completed. Tom checked the image on his camera's display screen. The photograph showed the creek exactly as Tom had composed it. Moonlight on water, surrounding forest, limestone bedrock visible beneath the clear flow. But it also showed something else. A figure standing in the center of the creek. Not a shadow or a trick of light, a distinct humanoid form, roughly 4 feet tall, clearly visible in the long exposure image. A child, standing in the water, facing Tom's camera. Tom's hands shook as he zoomed in on the image. The figure was detailed enough to see features. A young boy, maybe 8 or 9 years old, wearing clothes that looked wrong, not modern, but not historical enough to be costume. The boy's face was visible, but wrong. His eyes were too large. His mouth was too wide. His skin was the color of wet limestone. Tom deleted the image immediately, his photographer's instinct rejecting anything that couldn't be explained. He packed up his equipment and returned to the RV, saying nothing to Linda about what he'd captured. But that night, Tom dreamed of the creek. In his dream, he was standing in the water, the current flowing around his ankles, the limestone bedrock smooth and cold beneath his bare feet. And surrounding him in the creek were children, dozens of children, all the same limestone gray color, all watching him with 2 large eyes and 2 wide mouths. "You photographed us," the children said in unison. "You captured our image. You took something that belongs to the creek." Tom woke at 3:34 a.m., gasping. Linda stirred beside him but didn't wake. Tom checked his camera, confirming the deleted image was truly gone. But his camera's memory card now contained a new imageon Tom definitely hadn't taken. It showed the interior of their RV, taken from outside looking in through the bedroom window. The image was dark, shot at night, but clear enough to show Tom and Linda sleeping. And in the foreground of the image, between the camera and the window, was the limestone gray boy from the creek. He was closer now. Close enough that his face filled half the frame, his 2 large eyes reflecting the camera flash, his 2 wide mouth open in what might have been a smile. The metadata showed the image had been taken at 2:47 and 47 minutes ago, while Tom and Linda slept. Tom woke Linda immediately. "We're leaving. Right now. Pack everything. We're not staying here another minute." Linda, seeing the panic in her husband's face, didn't argue. They dressed quickly, began disconnecting their RV utilities, preparing for immediate departure. But when Tom tried to start the engine, it wouldn't turn over. The battery was dead completely, impossibly dead, despite being new and fully charged just hours ago. "I'll call roadside assistance," Linda said, reaching for her phone. No signal. Both their phones showed 0 bars, despite having full service when they'd arrived. Tom stepped outside to manually check the battery connections, taking his flashlight. The battery terminals were corroded, covered in a white crystalline substance that looked like mineral deposit. But the substance was growing, spreading across the battery like accelerated rust, consuming the metal terminals even as Tom watched. "Tom," Linda's voice from inside the RV, high and terrified. "Tom, there's something on the camera." Tom rushed back inside. Linda was holding his camera, the display screen showing the live view from the lens, which was still pointing out the bedroom window from where Tom had left it on the shelf. The live view showed the clearing around their RV, but it wasn't empty. Dozens of figures surrounded their vehicle. Children, all limestone gray, all with 2 large eyes and 2 wide mouths, all standing perfectly motionless in a circle around the RV. Tom looked out the window with his own eyes. The clearing was empty. No figures, no children, just darkness and trees, and the sound of Rocky Fork Creek flowing past. But through the camera, they were there, visible, present, real. One child, the boy from Tom's photograph, stepped forward and pressed his face against the RV's exterior. Tom heard the contact, a wet, scraping sound, like algae-covered stone sliding against metal. Through the camera's live view, Tom watched the boy's mouth open impossibly wide, revealing not teeth, but limestone formations, stalactites and stalagmites, the interior of a cave where a mouth should be. The boy spoke, his voice coming not from outside the RV, but from the camera speaker. "You took our image. The creek preserves images. The creek keeps everything that touches it. You touched us through your lens. Now we touch you back." The corrosion spreading across the RV's battery reached the interior electrical system. Every light in the RV died. Every electronic device shut down. The camera's live view went black. Tom and Linda sat in the darkness, listening to the wet, scraping sounds of limestone-gray children moving around their RV, touching it, covering it, slowly encasing it in mineral deposits that grew and spread like accelerated geological formation. By dawn, according to their non-electronic watches, the RV's exterior was completely covered in limestone formations, stalactites hanging from the roof, stalagmites growing from the ground around the tires, calcite deposits sealing every window and door. The RV had become part of the creek, part of the geological process, part of the limestone bedrock that made up this entire region. And inside, Tom and Linda Brennan had become part of the preservation process that Rocky Fork Creek had been performing for thousands of years, capturing, petrifying, and keeping everything that came into contact with its mineral-rich waters. The Brennan's RV was reported abandoned on September 28, 2024. Family members, concerned after 2 weeks of no contact, asked Alton police to investigate. Officers found the RV completely encased in limestone formations, as if it had been sitting there for centuries rather than weeks. Geological experts called to the scene couldn't explain the rapid mineral formation. When they finally broke through the limestone shell and entered the RV, they found Tom and Linda Brennan's belongings, clothes, supplies, camera equipment, but no sign of the couple themselves. Tom's camera was found with its memory card intact. The last image on the card showed the limestone gray boy, his cave mouth open, his 2 large eyes staring directly at the lens. And beneath the image was a caption, written in metadata that cameras don't normally generate. "The creek keeps everything. The creek preserves everything. The creek will have everything. Eventually. We are patient. We have geological time. And we are always hungry for new additions to our collection." 7 stories. 7 RV families. 7 encounters with something that exists in Alton, Illinois, something that the living don't understand and the dead can't escape. But these aren't isolated incidents. They're part of a pattern that's been repeating in Alton for nearly 200 years, ever since the first settlements were built on these bluffs overlooking the Mississippi River. Here's what the historical record shows. Between 1837 and 1863, the Confederate prisoner of war camp in Alton recorded 1534 deaths from disease, starvation, and violence. The bodies were buried in mass graves that were later built over first by the prison itself, then by the neighborhoods that came after. Between 1858 and 1972, Enos Sanitarium documented 847 patient deaths, though unofficial estimates placed the number closer to 2,000. The isolation ward alone, where patients were kept in solitary confinement for months or years, recorded 237 deaths between 1897 and 1962. The Mineral Springs Hotel, operating from 1914 to 1971, reported 17 guest disappearances that were never solved. Guest records show 43 additional deaths on the property: heart attacks, strokes, unexplained illnesses, all clustered around the courtyard where the natural spring flows. The underground tunnel system has claimed at least 37 confirmed deaths since the 1830s. Construction accidents, cave-ins, people who entered and never emerged. The actual number is probably higher, as many early incidents were never officially recorded. Add in the violence, say the lynchings, the murders, the industrial accidents, the drownings in the Mississippi River, and Alton's death toll over the past 2 centuries exceeds 5,000 documented fatalities in a city that's never had more than 30,000 residents. That's 1 death for every 6 people currently living here. That's a ratio of death to life that's statistically impossible in any normal American town. Alton isn't haunted by accident. Alton is haunted by design. Something about this place, the river, the bluffs, the limestone caves, the mineral springs, creates conditions where death doesn't end, where consciousness persists, where the dead remain aware, active, and hungry for company. The RV travelers who come to Alton are perfect victims. They're transient, temporary, easy to dismiss when they disappear. No ties to the community, no one to immediately notice their absence. Just another family who parked overnight and moved on in the morning. Except they didn't move on. They stayed. They joined the collection. And they're waiting for more. Since 2020, Alton has seen a dramatic increase in RV tourism, driven by social media posts about its haunted history and scenic riverfront location. The city has welcomed this tourism, building new RV-friendly parking areas, promoting its ghost tours, embracing its reputation as America's most haunted small town. In that same period, 17 RVs have been reported abandoned in Alton. 17 vehicles left behind with doors open, engines running, no sign of their occupants. Police investigations found nothing suspicious. The official explanation is always the same. The owners decided to leave the vehicles for financial reasons, or personal reasons, or reasons unknown. But the pattern is clear to anyone willing to look closely. 17 abandoned RVs, all parked near historically significant locations, all left behind by people who came to Alton seeking something: adventure, proof, understanding, or in the case of Robert and Grace Kimura, a peaceful end. And Alton gave them what they sought, at a price. So if you're planning an RV trip through the Midwest, if Alton, Illinois appears on your route, if you're drawn by the promise of haunted history and riverside charm, remember this: the town is beautiful, the history is real, the ghosts are present, but everything in Alton wants you to stay. The river wants you to stay. The tunnels want you to stay. The springs want you to stay. The dead want you to stay. And once you park your RV in this town, once you walk its haunted streets, once you drink its water or enter its buildings or listen too closely to its whispers, you might find that leaving becomes impossible. Because Alton doesn't just hold death. Alton is death, transformed into a living museum where the collected dead outnumber the living, and where every visitor might become the next permanent exhibit. Park carefully, stay alert, And whatever you do, don't drink the water.